In the 1830s, Texas was not a settled land. It was an edge, a frontier, a crucible of conflict where two worlds collided with brutal force. On one side, the nascent Republic of Texas, fueled by the relentless westward push of Anglo-American settlement. On the other, the vast, formidable territory of the Comanche, the Comanchería. This was not an empty wilderness awaiting civilization. It was the heart of a powerful Native American empire, a domain ruled by the most accomplished horsemen the continent had ever known. The conflict that defined this era was not one of simple misunderstandings. It was a clash of irreconcilable futures. Anglo-Texan society was built on the premise of private land ownership, fenced farms, and permanent towns. The Comanche way of life was nomadic, centered on the immense buffalo herds, the acquisition of horses, and a fluid concept of territory controlled not by a central government, but by numerous independent bands. This fundamental opposition was given a chilling voice by Mirabeau B. Lamar, the second president of the Republic of Texas, who declared in 1839 that the white man and the red man cannot dwell in harmony together. His administration's stated policy was not one of accommodation, but of expulsion, a rigorous war to drive all native tribes from Texas soil. In this unforgiving landscape, the stage was set for a tragedy whose echoes would shape the American West for generations. Into this volatile frontier came the Parker clan. They were the embodiment of the American pioneering spirit, a large, devout family led by the patriarch, Elder John Parker, seeking a new life on the rich Texas soil. Journeying from Illinois in the early 1830s, they were part of a wave of settlers drawn to the promise of land grants, in their case, within Robertson's colony. In 1834, on the headwaters of the Navasota River, they built their claim on the land, Fort Parker. It was a private fort, a communal bastion against the dangers of the frontier. 12-foot-high pointed log walls enclosed 4 acres, with blockhouses on 2 corners for defense and 6 cabins built into the stockade. The very existence of the fort was a contradiction. It was an act of profound hope, a belief that a permanent agricultural life could be carved out of the wilderness. Yet its high walls and loopholes were a constant, grim acknowledgement of the lethal danger that surrounded them. This duality was mirrored within the family itself. Elder John Parker, a man of faith, negotiated treaties with local Indian leaders, believing peace was possible. His son, James W. Parker, was more pragmatic and deeply skeptical. He understood that the Comanche were not a single unified nation. A treaty made with one band meant little to the others. Fort Parker, therefore, stood as a monument to a fragile and ultimately a false hope. To the settlers, the land was a frontier to be tamed. To the Comanche, or the Numanu, the people, as they called themselves, it was their domain. Their power was built on 2 foundations, the buffalo and the horse. The acquisition of horses had revolutionized their society, transforming them from mountain dwellers into the undisputed lords of the southern plains. Their society was not a centralized kingdom that could be dealt with through a single treaty. It was a fluid collection of bands, each with its own leaders who gained their position through prowess and held it only through the consent of their followers. This structure was a constant source of misunderstanding for Anglo-Americans seeking binding, permanent agreements. The Comanche economy was a powerful engine, fueled by the buffalo hunt, an extensive trade network, and raiding. Raids for horses, goods, and captives were not acts of random violence, but an integral part of their social and economic life. Captives, particularly women and children, were often adopted into the tribe, a practice that replenished populations and integrated new skills and bloodlines into the community. The subsequent life of Cynthia Ann Parker was not an anomaly, but the result of a long-standing Comanche cultural practice. Raiding was also a direct and calculated response to the pressures of encroachment and the betrayals of diplomacy. By the mid-1830s, any hope for peaceful coexistence was rapidly eroding. The sympathetic policies of leaders like Sam Houston had been abandoned in favor of Lamar's aggressive call for removal. The relationship was defined by a destructive feedback loop of violence and retribution, with each side convinced of the other's treachery. This cycle of betrayal reached its devastating apex in the Council House fight of 1840 in San Antonio. While this event occurred 4 years after the Parker Massacre, it perfectly illustrates the poisoned atmosphere of the era. Texan officials had demanded the return of all white captives as a precondition for peace talks. The Comanche arrived with only one, a horribly abused teenage girl, expecting to negotiate for the others individually, as was their custom. Enraged, the Texans attempted to take the 12 Comanche chiefs and their delegation hostage inside the council house. A bloody fight erupted, spilling into the streets. When it was over, every one of the 65 Comanche men, women, and children in the delegation was either dead or captured. 7 Texans were also killed. To the Comanche, attacking and killing negotiators was the ultimate act of perfidy. The event shattered any possibility of trust and ignited a burning desire for revenge. The Comanche response was swift and massive. The Great Raid of 1840, where hundreds of warriors under Chief Buffalo Hump sacked the coastal towns of Victoria and Linville, demonstrating their capacity for large-scale organized warfare. In this world of broken faith, even the most sacred symbols of peace could become weapons. May 19, 1836, a clear day on the Texas prairie. Inside Fort Parker, life went on. Some of the men were out working the fields more than a mile away. Inside the stockade were 6 men, along with the women and children of the Parker clan. Suddenly, the landscape changed. A large war party, numbering between 100 and 600 warriors from several tribes, Comanche, Kiowa, Caddo, and Wichita, appeared before the fort. They approached not with a war cry, but with a white flag of truce, asking for beef and directions to a water source. A debate erupted within the fort. Most were deeply suspicious, but Benjamin Parker argued that he should go out and speak with them, perhaps to buy time for the women and children to escape through a back gate. He went out once, then returned briefly to the fort with a dire warning. According to the account of his niece, Rachel Plummer, he told his family he believed they were all going to be killed and that they should run for their lives. Then, in an act of incredible bravery or tragic miscalculation, he went back out to parley again. It was a fatal attempt at personal diplomacy in a conflict that had grown too far large for any one man to contain. The warriors' response was immediate and brutal. Benjamin Parker was surrounded and impaled with lances. As he fell, the war party let out a yell and rushed the fort's open gates. The next few minutes were a scene of chaos and slaughter. Silas Parker, Benjamin's brother, was killed just outside the gate as he ran to help. Inside, Samuel Frost and his son Robert were cut down as they tried to flee. The family patriarch, 77-year-old Elder John Parker, was captured, tortured, and scalped. When the bloody work was done, 5 men lay dead. The rest of the fort's inhabitants, 23 in all, had managed to escape into the thickets along the Navasota River, beginning a desperate 65-mile flight to the safety of Fort Houston. But 5 were not so fortunate. They were seized by the warriors and carried away into the vastness of the Comanchería. Their capture would set in motion a series of events that would become one of the most enduring and tragic legends of the American West. For 17-year-old Rachel Plummer, captivity was an unrelenting nightmare. Soon after her capture, she was separated from her 2-year-old son, James, whom she would never see again. She became a slave to the Comanche, forced to perform grueling labor, and was subjected to beatings and burns. Pregnant at the time of her capture, she gave birth to a second son in the fall of 1836. The warriors, seeing the infant as an impediment to her work, killed the baby when he was just 6 weeks old. Her suffering was a stark reflection of the brutal reality faced by many adult captives. After 13 months, in June 1837, she was ransomed by Comancherero traders near Santa Fe. After a long and arduous journey, she was finally reunited with her husband in February 1838. Emaciated and scarred, she quickly wrote down her story. Her book, Rachel Plummer's narrative of 21-month servitude as a prisoner among the Comanche, was published in Houston that same year. It was the first such captivity narrative published in the Republic of Texas, and it became a sensation. Her harrowing account of torture, infanticide, and slavery was more than just a personal tragedy. It became a powerful public document. In a society already conditioned to see Native Americans as perfidious savages, her story provided visceral, emotional justification for the government's brutal policies of war and removal. Her personal pain was transformed into political fuel, hardening attitudes and helping to ensure that the conflict would be a war of extermination, not diplomacy. Rachel Plummer died in 1839, shortly after giving birth to a third child, her health broken by her ordeal. The fate of Rachel's 9-year-old cousin, Cynthia Ann Parker, could not have been more different. Her story challenges the simple narrative of victimhood and speaks to the profound complexities of culture and identity on the frontier. Following Comanche custom for young captives, Cynthia Ann was not enslaved but adopted into a Comanche family. Over the years, she completely assimilated. She forgot English, forgot the family of her birth, and became, in every meaningful way, a Comanche woman. She was given a new name, Naudda, which meant someone found. In the mid-1840s, she married a respected war chief, Peta Nocona. Together they had 3 children, 2 sons, Quana and Pecos, and a daughter, Topsana, whose name meant prairie flower. On several occasions when white traders or U.S. officials encountered her, she refused offers to be ransomed and returned to her biological relatives. Her family, her language, and her world were now Comanche. Her complete integration demonstrates that the Comanche practice of adoption was a powerful social mechanism, not merely a means of acquiring labor. For a child, the transformation could be total. This forces a difficult re-examination of the historical narrative. What defines a family? What is identity? And can a rescue be, from the perspective of the one being rescued, a second, more devastating kidnapping? For 24 years, Cynthia Ann lived as Naudda. That life came to a violent end on December 18, 1860. On that day, a force of Texas Rangers under the command of Lawrence Sullivan Ross swept down on a Comanche hunting camp on the Peace River. The event is a stark example of how a single moment in history can be framed in 2 completely contradictory ways. For the Texas Rangers and the white society they represented, it was a celebrated military victory. They had struck a blow against the Comanche and, to their astonishment, had rescued a white woman with blue eyes whom they had long thought dead. She was quickly identified by her uncle Isaac Parker as his lost niece. For the Comanche, and for Cynthia Ann's young son Quana, it was a massacre. According to Quana's later accounts, his father Peta Nocona was killed in the attack, and his mother and baby sister were abducted by the Rangers. A photograph taken of Cynthia Ann in Fort Worth shortly after her capture is a powerful and haunting testament to her perspective. Her hair is cut short, a traditional Comanche sign of deep mourning. She was not a rescued captive. She was a grieving widow and a prisoner of war. Cynthia Ann Parker never recovered from her second capture. The world she was forced into was alien to her. She no longer spoke its language or understood its customs. She was in effect a stranger in her own family's home. Though the Texas legislature granted her a pension and land in an act of sympathy, it could not mend her broken heart. She made several attempts to escape and return to her sons and her people, but was always caught and brought back. Her deep depression worsened after her daughter, Prairie Flower, died of an illness. Having lost her husband, her sons, and now her daughter, Cynthia Ann Parker reportedly lost her will to live. She died around 1871, by some accounts having starved herself to death in her grief. Her son Quana would later have her body moved from its Texas grave to be reburied with him in Oklahoma, a final act of reunion. The violence that destroyed one generation gave birth to the leader of the next. Quana Parker, son of Cynthia Ann and Peta Nocona,
was born around 1845. His youth was defined by the trauma of the Peace River Raid, which killed his father and stole his mother and sister, igniting in him a deep and abiding resentment of the Anglos. He found refuge with the Comanche, the most formidable and defiant of the Comanche bands. He quickly rose to prominence as a fierce and skilled warrior, leading raids across the Texas plains throughout the 60s and 70s. He was a principal leader in the Red River War and commanded the multi-tribal force of 700 warriors that attacked the buffalo hunters' outpost at Adobe Walls in 1874. For years, he and the Quahada were the last free Comanches, the final holdouts against the relentless advance of the U.S. Army. By 1875, the world of the Plains Indians was ending. The great buffalo herds, their primary source of sustenance, had been systematically destroyed by white hunters. Facing starvation for his people, Quanah Parker made a pragmatic decision. He led the last band of Quahadas to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and surrendered. What followed was one of the most remarkable transformations in the history of the American West. The man who had been the fiercest opponent of white settlement became its most effective negotiator. Appointed principal chief of the Comanche Nation by U.S. agents, Quanah became a powerful advocate for his people, guiding them down the difficult white man's road. He was a man of two worlds. He encouraged education and agriculture, became a successful rancher and shrewd investor, and cultivated friendships with powerful white men, from cattle baron Charles Goodnight to President Theodore Roosevelt. At the same time, he fiercely maintained his Comanche identity. He refused to convert to Christianity, was a leader in the Native American church and its peyote rituals, kept his long braids, and maintained a large home for his 7 wives and many children. The massacre at Fort Parker on May 19, 1836, was not merely a tragic footnote in the bloody history of the Texas frontier. It was an origin story. The brutal attack set in motion a chain of events that spanned 3/4 of a century, culminating in the rise of one of the most significant Native American leaders in U.S. history. Without the raid, Cynthia Ann Parker would have lived and died an anonymous pioneer woman. She would never have been captured, never have become Naudda, and never have married the chief, Peta Nakona. And without that union, born of violence and adaptation, Quanah Parker would never have existed. The story that began with a family torn apart by a clash of cultures ends with a son who embodied both. Quanah Parker, who took his mother's surname to honor both sides of his heritage, spent his life bridging the two worlds that had tried to destroy one another. In 1910, he traveled to Texas to bring his mother's remains back to Oklahoma, to be buried among the people she had chosen as her own. In this final act, the long tragic arc that began at Fort Parker found its resolution not in victory or defeat, but in the quiet reunion of a mother and her son.